So it's kind of interesting that we're talking about seasons, considering that over 500 people have died in Nigeria officially from flooding.
Nature was like, you both do the podcast. Let me attack your countries first so you have something to talk about with more passion. It's really upsetting.
It is really upsetting. And the Nigerian authorities are barely doing anything about it. So I don't even trust their numbers.
These extreme weather conditions are like a traveling show.
I know.
The best part is you don't even need tickets.
All right, guys, let's get into the episode.
Hello and welcome to the Planet Policy Pals podcast, where friends discuss environmental news from around the planet. Also policies, because that's what Allah loves doing.
It is.
So, meet my co-host, Allah.
Hello.
How are you?
Girl, how are any of us doing? I'm just getting along.
Yeah, you know what? I'm just really glad that it's fall, so I can officially be sad without being judged.
Okay. You know what? Spring makes me sad.
Spring is happy. It's blooming. Everything is... There's colors everywhere. So, you are a very weird person. So let's get into this episode because I don't think I can further get into how spring makes you sad.
I like to consider myself unique, not weird.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's what we're telling kids these days. Sorry, I forgot. Speaking of seasons, this episode is about seasons and how we see them really changing, right?
Yeah.
Like, winter is here earlier, the seasons are changing, and so are our moods. That's why we've been a little on and off. Currently, we're still on and off with episodes. Really hope you caught our extra policy on textiles, where we gave you a bunch of solutions that you can use because, we know that we added a little bit of doom in your life when we said don't wear this, don't wear that. So that whole episode is actually dedicated to help you pick what you can and cannot wear.
Exactly.
And for our environmental news, there was a social media thing that was trending on Twitter. Cardi B even tweeted about it.
She did.
And Cardi B loves tweeting. So scientists are actually left a little perplexed after billions of crabs and crustaceans reportedly disappeared mysteriously in the Bering Sea of the U.S. state of Alaska in the last several years. Ben Daly, a researcher with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, told CNN that the snow crab population shrank from about 8 billion in 2018 to about 1 billion in 2021.
That's so wild.
Where did all this crab go?
Right?
Yeah. Was it all right, peace out. This is not a fun place to be no more. I know we've discussed overfishing on this show multiple times, and this is one of the reasons that sustainable fishing is actually quite important. Food systems. We'll talk more about this in this episode, but coming back to the snow crabs, they are the most popular species in the Bering Sea. So this disappearance is definitely alarming, to say the least. What's causing this, Allah? Warming sea temperatures, maybe? Or is there something else?
Yeah, so when I saw it, I immediately thought the same thing, warming sea temperatures. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which is the ADFNG, and the National Marine Fisheries Service, NMFS, actually canceled snow crab season because of this. By the way, Black Twitter was in shambles. Everybody was like, no, my crab legs. The thing is, they're not exactly sure what caused the mass crab exodus, as it were. Although one researcher, only him or her, thinks that maybe it's disease. The more common consensus is the warming of the sea. And science is tentative, so of course they're still investigating this. Record-breaking warm ocean temperatures occurred in 2019 on the South Bering Sea shelf, while bottom temperatures on the Northern Bering Shelf exceeded 4 degrees Celsius for the first time in November 2018. So 2 years back to back of warmth in two parts of it. And a lot of the fish species in the Bering Sea have been migrating northward towards Russia. So one big thing is that as it warms, crabs, young crabs especially, they need cooler temperatures when they're really young. So they try to find cold pools to survive. But as they're all trying to fit in that one cold pool and they can't move around, they tend to starve and die before they can grow. So that could be it.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Another thing with the warming temperatures is natural predators of crabs like cod, for example, they like warmer temperature water, not super warm, but warmer than what crabs like. So they could be coming in as well and causing this problem. They could also just have dipped like the fish and been like, bye-bye, we're going to Russia.
And you can't even bring them back from Russia. Ask your basketball players.
Oh my God. Oh, Brittany Griner. Poor girl. I really feel for her.
I do really feel bad for her.
First the alligators, then the turtles, and now we're coming for the IG Cook staple. Guys, think of the influencers. What will they put tons of butter and Alfredo sauce on? Huh? How will the people doing how will the mukbang YouTubers exist if we kill all the crabs? It's a serious issue.
How will they call themselves chefs now? Okay, they only knew how to cook one thing.
Exactly. Speaking of warming winters, let's talk about some warm weather. This summer, we saw a lot of extreme weather events happen around the world. Monsoons were going crazy. Heat waves were killing people. Aja, is this something that we're going to keep seeing? Is it indeed the coolest summer and the warmest winter of our lives? Or is it all just a hoax?
Well, I mean, definitely not a hoax, or we're in the wrong field.
I know, right?
Rethink our choices.
I'm about to be unemployed.
Yeah, like you just went and did a whole ass degree in the field, only to find out it ain't even real. Yeah. But if we really talk about patterns, climate scientists report that in 1952, the summer heat lasted about 78 days in the middle latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere. In 2011, it lasted about 95 days.
That's a big shift.
Yeah, it really is, right? So our 4 unsettled seasons, they appear to be fusing into 2, like hot and less hot, and deadly and less deadly. So, like, none of these options are good, right?
Yeah.
Around the world, as we're seeing, summer heat, drought, floods, and even fire, now they pose like such grave and intertwined threats to life, property, and everything that we are seeing around us. Christina Dahl, a climate researcher with the Union of Concerned Scientists, she has argued that summer should be renamed danger season. And this girl knows what she's talking about, guys.
I said this before and I'll say it again. We need to join the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Yeah, we are very concerned. Please take us in your union.
Consider this an application.
Consider this. Hey, audio applications work now. Maybe this could be it.
Exactly.
Edit this part out and send it in.
I will.
No, but seriously, Ala, are we approaching the end of another summer? Or like the end of summer as we know it? Like, how dire do you think this is? Am I still going to get my sad girl autumn? You know, it's really important to me.
Oh my God. Well, that girl who does her Christian Girl Autumn was still able to track the leaves and she put out great fall pictures. I stan. But of course, I think it's dire. I mean, when the IPCC says we are not on track to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature goals, it doesn't look good. If you forgot what that is, I'll discuss it a bit in the episode. But I do think seasons, they won't disappear abruptly, and that's part of the problem because it's sort of a phasing thing. You see shorter springs, shorter fall in the northern and southern hemispheres, and the tropics are already screwed. I mean, my God. I will say this is the first episode of this series where nothing in the research really shocked me because this just happens to be the closest thing to what I do, quote unquote, my expertise, if we can even consider me an expert,
of course,
in environmental science and engineering. So, yeah, I'm just going to tell you guys right now, like, I do look into like predicting weather patterns and precipitation, and I study the history of them, and it doesn't look good. So I'll say that much.
Do you want to tell us in detail what exactly is happening? Like, are the seasons actually changing, and why are they changing?
So, yeah, that's a good point. Let me explain. Basically, you have large-scale impacts of external factors affecting extreme events in the way seasons vary, and weather patterns are included in this, of course. The overall net increase in temperature that's caused by radiation is increasing the moisture content of the atmosphere. And that also increases what we call the land-sea temperature contrast, because there is a good temperature contrast for them to have and a balance between those systems, but it's being thrown off. For example, you're going to see changes in circulation patterns. They're already happening. And that change in circulation patterns is what aggravates things like monsoon season, like we saw with Pakistan and parts of India just, 2 months ago? Not even?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. If we think about the regional and local scale effect, you also have additional processes that mess with overall changes in extremes. And you have to think about it like regional feedbacks and cycles. Again, let me use land and something else like atmosphere. You have the precipitation of moisture into the air, and then you have transpiration, of course. You have condensation, things like that. But as an example, when soil moisture or snow and atmospheric precipitation, they have a feedback loop system between them. And when that gets thrown off, then you get more snow than you expect, or you get more rain than you expect, or in some cases, you even get less. So that's something to consider. That's kind of what's happening here. These cycles are being affected, and then they're affecting the bigger picture interaction. And that's what's worsening extreme events.
Oh, well, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
what are the seasons going to look like?
Well, we aren't 100% sure, but we have an idea. I found this really cool study in the Geophysical Research Letters journal, and of course it's in the show notes. But they found that summer in the Northern Hemisphere, so we're talking like Americas and Europe, the mid-altitudes has lengthened, whereas winter has shortened. And so this is leading to changes in when seasons are starting and when seasons are withdrawing. And it's also the reason we're getting shorter spring and autumns. As an example, over the period of 1952 to 2011, like you said, the length of summer increased, right? However, what they saw was that the length of spring, autumn, and winter decreased. Spring went from 124 to 115. Autumn went from 87 to 82, and winter wasn't as bad, but it went from 76 to 73, so that's a little shorter.
Oh, you must be happy because spring got shorter. Thanks, Ala.
Oh gosh, now I'm counting the extreme events. I'm one of the cycles, guys. Anyway, another thing that you have to consider is that summer is projected to start lasting nearly half a year by 2100. But winter by 2100 should be 2 months to less in most of the Northern Hemisphere, if our predictions are correct and if there's no other extreme changes. Keep in mind, a lot of predictive models rely on historical data. So if we change the systems even more, these numbers could become further aggravated. So yeah, the beginning of seasons is also likely to change, and it's important because we know a lot of industries rely on when seasons start, especially in agriculture. Spring and summer have already begun to start earlier, and autumn and winter are starting a little later. So that's why, like, it is cold now, it's October, but you can't really be like, oh, as soon as September is ending, I'm going to see fall leaves as sure as you could before. And another thing is, temperature has risen clearly in these extended summers, which, we already covered that.
Oh, yeah. That is pretty upsetting, but
It is.
Why is this happening?
All right, let's get a little science-y.
Yay!
According to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we love them, greenhouse gases alone would likely have resulted in a greater warming than observed if there had not been an offsetting cooling effect from like aerosols and the other things that we put into the air, which also affect ozone layer warming.
So what they're saying is there was enough greenhouse gases to fuck up the environment. You didn't have to add other stuff, but there you went and did that as well. So great job, guys. We're there faster.
Well, that's true. So the regular greenhouse gases were already a problem. Then the human greenhouse gases made it worse. But then we also have things that fix on ozone from aerosols, and those cause a cooling effect as well. But it's even with those cooling effects, it's still pretty bad, is the general gist of it. So the changes in both seasonal phases and seasonal temperatures have been detected to be under the temperature threshold definition, which is basically what this means in the long run. What that sentence means is As scientists, as engineers, as data analysts, we have a general idea of what temperature thresholds are for each season based on tracking history. So we can follow this temperature variation every season, and we can see that high temperature events like drought and heat waves in summer are consistent with warming temperatures usually. And because warming is largely anthropogenic, I mean, let's be real, right? Like 2 plus 2 doesn't equal tangerines, guys. Like we're causing it. It's anthropogenic. It's human caused. Be for real. But exactly, a changing climate can be expected to then lead to change in weather, right? But it becomes complicated to associate one extreme event, like if you have one extremely dry season, with a specific cause like greenhouse gases, because we have so many cycles and so many things that happen in the air. Like, it's not even funny, you guys. For you to say this is happening to even one ecosystem area, for sure, you have to analyze a lot of variables environmentally. I'm telling you, because I'm dealing with it right now. You have to consider precipitation. You have to consider the soil itself. You have to consider the kind of vegetation. Then you have to consider wind direction. You have to consider wind speed. It's a whole lot of things.
So before coming up to Allah and saying, there was a snowstorm, are you really going to tell me that the earth is warming? Yeah, rethink it, okay? Listen to this part again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Don't come to me
PSA.
like that. I'm telling you right now. But let me put it this way. There's correlation, but science is tentative, like I said. So we are trying to conduct more studies, do more data analysis, and say for sure, this is definitely what's affecting the weather. But right now, the evidence points to changing climates causing disruption in our weather patterns. The real issue, of course, is how will this affect us? I mean, it already kind of does. And the environment, because, humans, we care about ourselves. So, Adjoa, am I eventually going to die from winter? Is it going to get too cold for me to live?
No, I don't. I think you'll be fine. You just told us winter is getting smaller. It's going to be harsher, but I think just buy yourself some Patagonia and you'll be fine.
Yes, free plug. They really
them.
should. Patagonia and Grove Collective should sponsor us because we're always big upping them.
They really should, yeah. And a bunch of these organizations could hire us or keep us on their panel. Like,
I'm just saying.
NOAA we talk about a lot.
I mean, IPCC, like, we're right here.
Yeah, like, we ain't going nowhere. Literally, our life is going nowhere. Please, right here.
Oh, God. Like, it's a miracle that my research is finally coming to its conclusion. Thank God.
But obviously, changing weather patterns is going to affect humans, and that's what you should care about because that's the only thing that we care about as a species. They are very closely linked to the natural environment. As you must notice that, if it rains, your mood changes. If it's sunny, your mood changes. So yeah, if you thought that it's not going to affect you, think again. So much that, in fact, the World Health Organization has called climate change the single biggest health threat that is facing humanity.
Agreed.
And we all know, it can have a range of impacts on physical, mental. Actually, mental, they're talking about a lot more now because it has a lot more effects than initially thought. And community health, all these viruses and stuff. So the severity of these health risks will depend on the ability of public health and safety systems to really address or prepare for these changing threats. And also factors like individual behavior, age, gender, and economic status. So the impacts actually really vary depending on where a person lives, how sensitive they are to health threats, and how much they are exposed to climate change impacts. Also, how well their community is able to manage these changes and if they can adapt. So, like we always say, developing countries will be affected more because of their limitations to climate mitigation and adaptation. But while people in developing countries may be the most vulnerable to health risks globally, climate change does pose significant threats to even countries like rich countries, right? And especially rich countries also has poor people. And they also have children, they have pregnant women, they have older people. And they're all more exposed to these risks. They're more vulnerable. So how do these different factors affect us? Well, temperature is a really big one.
I bet.
Yeah, as we see average temperatures getting higher, that will lead to hotter days and obviously longer and more frequent heat waves, as we saw in multiple places around this world this year.
Yeah.
Exposure to this extreme heat can lead to heat stroke, dehydration, also heart problems, respiratory problems, cerebrovascular diseases, and they will also eventually lead to death, reaching as much as like thousands or like tens of thousands of additional deaths that were going to happen if we did not have these changing seasons. We are already seeing these rise in deaths, but by the end of this century, during summer months, these deaths are only going to go up, like they're not coming down.
Yeah.
And this excessive heat
Yeah, that's so true. Look at how the UK was just flummoxed when they had that intense heat wave. Those buildings aren't prepared for that. Mm-hmm. But speaking of factors, how about the air quality? Because, temperature changes and things like that, they can also affect the quality of the air that we breathe. What's happening there?
Well, of course. I mean, people in Asia are the biggest example of that. China, India, even Pakistan. It's really bad air quality. There's a lot of pollution in the air. Most mornings in the winter, you wake up and your visibility is like less than 10 meters.
Right.
And that's because changes in the climate, they do affect the air that we breathe, both indoors and outdoors. As temperatures heat up and these weather patterns are shifting, air quality changes, and that obviously leads to asthma attacks and a lot of other respiratory and, of course, heart and health issues. Rising carbon dioxide levels and warming temperatures also affect airborne allergens such as ragweed pollen.
Oh, pollen.
Yeah. I didn't even know I was allergic, but as climate change is really wreaking havoc, I realized. One of the nurses actually told me, she's like, maybe you weren't before, but let me just tell you, you are allergic to pollen. I'm like, okay, well, I guess it must have just increased a lot.
It has. I'm actually allergic to pollen of different kinds from grass, ragweed, trees. And of course, my allergies suck in the spring, which is another reason I hate spring. But more and more, I'm noticing that my allergies through the fall season are lasting longer and longer. And I track the pollen count. This has nothing to do with my research. I'm just a nerd in my spare time. I track pollen count wherever I live throughout the year. And I've noticed that it's gone up significantly in my area as it's been cooling a little bit.
Yeah, it's getting, and pollen isn't the only thing that's actually going up.
Oh, yeah?
We are going to also see that there's going to be unhealthy levels of ground level ozone, which is actually a harmful air pollutant and a component in smog, because warmer temperatures from climate change really mess things up, guys.
And if you guys remember from, what was that episode where we talked about, the celebrity jet episode? What was that, episode 48? Where we talked about the chemistry of how this happens. And we also talked about London smog. You guys, we're about to go back, decades in air quality because of warming temperatures.
Yeah, this has been a concern for a while now. But, okay, we'll talk about mitigation and adaptation at the end. So I will save my rants for then. But this ground level ozone can actually damage lung tissue. It can reduce lung function and inflame airways. Like, did you not think it's going to hurt your lungs? You're literally breathing this.
True.
And again, children, older people, and people who work outdoors really, and people who already have asthma and other chronic lung diseases are obviously particularly at risk to this.
Of course. So what about other diseases that are maybe not lung related? Are there other things that could happen?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you asked because I've got a whole list of them.
Okay.
We have vector-borne diseases, right? Now, these are diseases that are these are illnesses that are transmitted by disease vectors like mosquitoes, ticks, or fleas, like small little tiny insects. And these vectors, they can carry infectious pathogens like viruses, bacteria, and protozoa. It can carry it from animals to humans. And of course, we all know where COVID came from, you guys.
Please, I can't do another pandemic.
Every day we are like, time and again, you're going to hear, oh, there's a new virus coming in. Another novel virus takes over this part of the world, or this is taking over. You know why that's happening? Climate change. Oh God, I sound like that Greta Thunberg video about the government. It's like, I love that video. Oh my God, that girl. I love her.
Man. We stand.
Yeah. So basically, when temperatures are high and there's more precipitation, those are literally the perfect environments for these insects and these vectors to exist, which is warmer temperatures and stagnant waters, really. And as temperatures rise, mosquitoes are spreading diseases farther than ever before. If climate change continues the way it is going, an additional 4.7 billion people could be at risk of mosquito-borne diseases like malaria or dengue fever by 2070. Well, I'm currently at risk of dengue, so please pray for me.
Oh my God. We should be wiping out malaria and dengue. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. Well, it's getting, actually, the numbers are going up instead of coming down, and that's going to keep happening.
Ugh. So I bet you have some more diseases for us.
Of course I do. Thank you for bringing it up. Well, like we talked about water, there's going to be a lot of water-related illnesses, you guys. So I'm just going to keep it really, really, really short because, yeah, bad water can kill you in more ways than one, okay?
Yeah.
You drink contaminated water, you're screwed. You sit in contaminated water, you're screwed. You shower in contaminated water, you're screwed.
You're screwed.
So really, protect the water, you guys. We are screwed, okay? And climate change obviously increases the risk of illnesses through rising temperatures because there's going to be more frequent heavy rains and runoffs, and that is going to run off into your water bodies, and that's where you get your water. And the effects of storms is also going to get into your water bodies.
Yeah.
So save yourself because the diseases that you can get are also, including the above mentioned, can affect gastrointestinal illnesses like diarrhea and gastrointestinal diseases like diarrhea, or even with your liver or kidney damage. And then it can also have effects on the body's nervous and respiratory systems, like everything else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, water is gonna really mess us up if you don't fix it anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's enough on humans. Yeah, we're screwed, guys. But it's because of us all. So let's talk about the other species. How is it harming the poor little animals who can't really do anything?
I know, the animals. So, as Adjo has established, seasons drive the structure of ecosystems, but they also influence how animals do certain things like mate, how they feed, how they migrate, like we saw with the crabs and the fish in the Bering Sea.
Also, an entire episode that we talked about mating and how temperatures are affecting how often they're going to get laid.
Yeah, that's true. We did. We talked about that. Episode 48. Go check it out.
How is every episode 48, Ala? You just said the jet episode was 48.
Oh, really? The jet episode was 47. Mm-hmm. Don't do me.
Okay.
So animals occupying temperate, Arctic, and alpine regions, like cold and mountainous places, and basically the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, those environments, they experience specific and very cyclical variation in biotic, like living things, plants, bacteria, other animals, and abiotic, soil, water, atmosphere, non-living things, factors. And so over time, these animals have evolved seasonal life history strategies for coping with these conditions, just like the way bears will hibernate in certain seasons. The conditions they have to deal with include these short but mild summers where they have peaks in resource availability and animals can give birth and they can forage and they can store food. And then, of course, like these long, harsh winters with food shortages, where they depend on their fat reserves for energy and they hibernate. Because unlike humans, animals understand that nobody should have to work in insanely cold weather. They get it.
Yeah.
My bosses don't get it, but they get it.
we need to learn something.
I know. So anyway, these animals in mountainous areas and at the extreme hemispheres obviously suffer from this more because they've adapted, like these polar bears, penguins, certain aquatic life. They have developed this over billions of years You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden now the seasons are switching. Things are shorter than they should be. I have a fantastic example from the new, what is it called? Is it Frozen World or whatever? That Sir David Attenborough did, that new documentary.
Yeah, Frozen Planet, I think.
Frozen Planet, exactly. Baby seals in the Arctic are dying because they usually learn to swim in super cold water because they have fur and they aren't really ready to go on their own. So they rest on ice blocks that are in the sea floating around the Arctic. They drown if they swim too long because they haven't learned how yet, and they can die from starvation because the first animal to run away when their homes get too warm are fish. Seals eat fish. Let me tell you, one thing about fish, they will disappear. They will dip. They do not have any time for nonsense. They abandon all the other animals in the sea and they're like, goodbye, we're going to go find cold.
I'm going to guess the phrase, I'm a dip, comes from fish.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, this is an environmental podcast, so we need to cover resources as well, which tell the people about some resources, Ajwa.
Well, of course, I really care about resources because land and water is what we really need to live, you guys. Mm-hmm. And obviously, like I talked about earlier, climate change is going to have some massive impact on water, especially freshwater ecosystems. That will affect availability, quality, distribution, form, pretty much everything about them is going to be screwed. In certain regions where stream flow and precipitation increase, flooding could threaten the structure and the actual functions of the aquatic systems, which will obviously lead to increased pollution of freshwater ecosystems, especially where human-mediated activities might have altered the landscape already, because obviously we have to mess everything up.
We do.
And the impacts of climate change on the Earth's freshwater resources, they actually have the potential of affecting international waters because do you guys know what most wars are fought on, right? Water.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, like we have more wars on water
than on land.
Than we probably do on women?
Oh, Jesus.
No, really. That can actually, especially where people are like sharing borders and sharing wetlands and sharing rivers like India and Pakistan or
India and
the
Pakistan.
Middle East. India and Pakistan been at war for 70 plus years over a piece of land and water, really. But in most regions of the world where there are actually observed and projected declines in per capita average of annual freshwater availability, also including the population growth, the possibility of increased demand for water will obviously very likely lead to increased withdrawal of water, which will invariably reduce the recharging time of the water tables. And I keep saying this, the area that I live, our water tables are depleted. There are too many people living in this land.
I should also add, because I know we've talked about, aquifers and water tables on the show. And one of the problems, like as you take water out for drinking and everything like that, there's also, you have to consider industrial activity like mining, and any kind of mining or drilling, things like that are going to throw off discharge from aquifers. And then the natural recharge time is lower. And in countries with lax regulations, or even sometimes states with lax regulations, those water tables aren't getting refilled by the people taking things out from the land because they know, but they don't think about the aquifers, I guess, or there's no regulation to stop them. So poor countries are more at risk of this problem.
And also, when there's a lot of people living in an area, you have a lot of construction. And when there's a lot of constructed ground, any water that is even coming from rain and precipitation is not actually going into the ground.
That is true.
And these changes are going to influence like a wide range of water system components like reservoir operations, water quality, hydroelectric generation, because a lot of countries still depend on that.
Right.
And also navigation. In some regions where large volumes of water are channeled for non-consumptive purposes such as agricultural demand and especially for irrigation, water supply is going to be a particularly sensitive factor to climate conditions. Demand for irrigation water tends to increase as conditions become hotter and drier because those crops still need to grow. Mm-hmm. Also, rising population means rising demand for these crops, which means rising demand for the water that is used in irrigation. Really, it's a whole cycle, guys. We're messing one thing up, you mess all of them up. And a possible change in this field level climate, it's going to result in altering the timing of and also the need for irrigation. Like Ala mentioned, crops are raised according to the seasonal crops. So if seasons are shifting, the time that we're going to be needing these crops is also going to be shifting.
Exactly.
It's a whole cycle, guys. It's all messed up. And also, when we talk about higher concentrations of, since climate change is all about carbon dioxide, as people like to believe, that can also act as a fertilizer for some plants, right? But it lowers the levels of protein and essential mineral in crops like wheat, rice, and potatoes, which makes these foods less nutritious. And we all know these are actually staple foods in a lot of places. Extreme events like flooding and drought, they also create challenges for food distribution if like roads and waterways are damaged or made inaccessible, like we talked about in Pakistan earlier this year. A whole province was cut off from resources because there was literally no roads that were not underwater.
Yeah.
Speaking of not getting better, we should probably talk about what governments or people in power are doing about it.
Let's talk policy.
Well, they are working on climate mitigation plans, and they have to because, extreme weather cost taxpayers like $99 billion in 2020. So we have a problem, okay? That's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
And which is why, although we discuss specific countries usually, we are switching it up as this is a very global issue. We are seeing this everywhere. So it is time for us to do something we've done about 3 times before. Check in on Paris Climate Agreement goals.
Yay!
Which we love talking about. By the way, the IPCC released a synthesis report in February, and we covered the available parts before complete review last year, episode 25. Check it out. So we'll check on them soon, maybe when we cover COP and get scolded by respectfully upset scientists. Ala, since this is literally one of your hobbies, what's new?
Okay, let's talk about the Paris Climate Agreement. Quick recap if you are new to the show. If you're not new to the show, at this point, you should know what that entire agreement is about. But in 2015, 194 countries agreed to come up with nationally determined contributions, we call them NDCs, to tackle climate change and hit specific global goals by 2030, also known as the Paris Climate Agreement.
Ta-da-da-da!
However, as of September of this year, the pledges so far would reduce GHGs by 2% from 2019 to 2030 if nothing changes. And obviously this is very far from the goal.
But remember to give them a pat on the back, Ala.
Yeah.
Because they want that.
Good job, guys. That 2%. But also, like the World Resources Institute said this, not me, so you could trust them. According to the report that they released, countries need to strengthen their targets by about 6 times what we're at right now, or at least 43% to align with what the UN IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, like we said before, says is enough to reach the Paris Agreement's goal of limiting global temperature rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, if you're like that. That's the 1.5 we're always talking about, basically. It's our goal to avoid raising global temperatures by more than 1.5% by the time we reach 2030. And it exists because we are worried that beyond that, we would be too much for the current climate and because vulnerable countries would see extreme and dangerous disasters. It used to be the Cancun 2 degrees Celsius, by the way, but the IPCC said, nope, tighten it. So we did. We tried.
And nothing changed.
Yeah. Let's do a very brief deep dive into who's where. According to the Climate Action Tracker, another thing that we love on the show, 21 countries submitted updated NDCs this year. But Australia and Indonesia actually tightened theirs this year, along with 14 other countries and the EU, which happens to be the world's 3rd biggest emitter. And the EU actually planned to cut its net emissions by 55% by 2030 from their 1990 levels, which is one of the most ambitious goals among major economies. It's stronger than previous pledges, but it is likely not going to actually have a submitted plan until next year. Because what they do is they pledge, then they plan, then they submit the NDC, and then they implement the NDC. It's a lot of steps. Now, Brazil, India, UK, and Egypt is hosting the COP this year, by the way, did not increase ambitions this year. They didn't even propose anything new. In fact, India did not submit NDCs last year. They just proposed one, and that doesn't mean shit in this particular area of policy. I'm sorry to say, proposing an NDC is not the same thing as submitting an NDC, because you're not really held to anything if all you have is a proposal or a plan. Now, there were almost 30 submissions last year that countries are actively working on, which is why we're seeing in the US, for example, Biden is tightening climate efforts over here. So, keep that in mind. All in all, though, I think based on what I said, you guys can tell, but we have a long way to go. The Paris Agreement does set many suggestions in its governing body of work, in its body of work, but we wanted to share something interesting that we found while researching. So, Adjoa, some expert solutions.
Well, first off, stop climate change. Really, that's how we're going to fix these extreme weather patterns. But in light of Elon Musk's carbon capture technology exhibition, I must mention this paper, which is the Natural Climate Solutions.
You guys, Adjoa doesn't mention Elon for one episode challenge. I promise you, it will never happen.
It's not happening. Okay, it is. I'm going to mention him. But in this paper called Natural Climate Solutions that was published in Proceedings of the National Academies of the Sciences, it shows that with concerted global action between now and 2030, since Allah talks a lot about 2030,
it's important.
Better land management can offer 30% of the solution for keeping global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius or below, which will be the same as if the world today put a complete stop on the burning of oil.
Oh.
Yeah. The paper's economic analysis that also showed that natural climate solutions, the proven ways of storing and reducing carbon emissions in forests, grasslands, and wetlands, and not actual flying UFOs that you're going to have to, suck up your carbon dioxide somehow, they can provide really low-cost opportunities and are often significantly more cost-effective when you're comparing them to these technological solutions. So we can totally work on it because right now, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and clean transport, they together receive nearly 30 times the amount of public mitigation investment that land-based solution received. And we talked earlier how important land resources are, especially for this measure, especially for mitigation.
Right.
Of the funding that is set aside for natural climate solutions, the vast majority of it tends to focus on tropical forest protection in developing countries. But this study actually showed that a variety of natural climate solutions, including those in grassland and agricultural and wetland ecosystems, are relevant across the globe. Like we talked about earlier, that this is a very global issue. Everybody is facing the consequences. Everybody's contributing to it. So we know it has a large impact on almost any country's emissions. Also, these solutions, they can bring added social and environmental benefits, all the issues that we talked about earlier. Your air can be cleaner, your water can be cleaner. You can actually have sustainable food production cycles, and your habitats can actually, your ecological habitats can grow and be better.
Exactly. And this is why, if you remember in the Pakistan episode, I talked a lot, I think we both talked a lot about the idea of proper adaptation of infrastructure. And I was saying that beyond just, built infrastructure, there's also floodplains, your beaches, your wetlands, your grasslands. These things are so important. And so many people, so many engineers, scientists, analysts, policymakers work in these fields. But I feel like it's like you said, I don't think this area receives enough money and funding. But I think it has such a huge impact. I'm not just saying that because I happen to work in one of these. I'm just saying it really, give me your money, first of all. But yes, it really makes a difference.
I did say expert opinion, and you there, girl.
Okay, let's calm down. I don't know if I say expert.
Well, this is a question to you guys and also Allah. our in-house expert.
Oh boy.
What areas are at risk in your opinion? When we talk about how some areas are more vulnerable, which ones do you think it is?
So I know we talk about 2030 a lot, but I want to talk about right now it's about a 40-year projection. It used to be a 50-year projection. People will survive because people will migrate. We survive. That's what we do. But in places that are more agrarian, especially in tropical areas closer to the equator, you're going to have situations worsening. So next year, we can expect worse monsoon seasons. There will be more extreme drought as we progress. And in the next 40 years, even in temperate areas, coastal areas will be gone. In fact, a huge portion of Nigeria is experiencing flooding at a level we have never seen before right now. And it's not really something that a lot of these areas can deal with. Yeah, I think mostly these agrarian areas close to the tropics, and the coastal cities in temperate climes. For instance, like Miami, something like that. So, Adjoa, now that we've come to the end of this episode, do you think seasons disappearing will be that serious? Is this more of a long-term issue, or we should be worried right now?
Well, changing seasons is really kind of an evidence or something that we or climate experts have been warning for a while, and we have been expecting, right? So they're really just a sign of how bad climate change really has gotten, and it's going to keep getting worse. And the seasons and changing seasons are an actual representation of that. So I think it is a really serious thing. It is a really dire thing because we are now seeing the real impact of climate change.
Sure.
It's here for receipts.
For sure. All right, guys. So we've come to the end of the episode. But of course, before we go, question for you guys. Which season do you guys hope holds out the most? Personally, for me, I'm a fall girl, but it doesn't look good for fall, guys. Also, this is not about this episode, but for this year's Conference of the Parties on Climate Change, our little environmental Super Bowl, COP, do you guys prefer a preview of what to expect or a recap afterwards? Let us know. We'll do maybe an extra policy full episode. We're not sure. I will say, I think methane is going to be a big topic in the Egypt COP this year. So I'm kind of excited for that.
Yeah.
We keep asking y'all to donate, and unfortunately, we do have to do that again because Nigerians in largely rural and agrarian areas, like I said, are suffering from a climate disaster, which has been ongoing for almost a month. And millions of people have been displaced. I have to say, it is disappointing how few organizations have coverage that this got internationally. But I have two to recommend that I have checked and I'm sure of. There's the Save the Children organization, which is an organization I personally have donated to for a good chunk of my adult life. And I trust them because 84% of their money goes directly to programs. So they're working in 6 states right now. I know it's not a lot of states, but they provide items, shelter, food to families. So donate to them. Then the international rescue community in Nigeria is also worth donating to, as they're pretty transparent and they get good ratings for use of funds. I checked, don't worry. They also focus heavily on poorer communities, people that might be displaced from this disaster. So, good to donate there.
Yes, guys, please do donate.
It's a serious situation. Thank you for joining us. As always, we love all of you listening, even if you like cold seasons. I'll judge you, but I love you.
Or spring. I will judge you. Please stop liking happiness.
We are off next week, and then we will either be interviewing an environmental epidemiologist about neonatal development and environmental hazards. We're going to do that regardless, but we might be doing the preview of COP next, depending on how you guys vote. So let us know. One of those will be coming up in the week after this one. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram, Planet Policy Pals, or find us on Facebook. Email your questions and comments to planetpolicypals@gmail.com or hit us up in our DMs. Please rate and review us. I'm begging. Stay awesome, stay safe, stay stress-free. And until next time,
keep learning how.